It's me again. And now I'm done with like the test, the taste test. I'm kind of like really happy with like this batch of things I tried. I don't know, I always like trying, new things is something that very much excites me and makes me kind of like look forward, to life, finding new things and trying them on. Well, not trying them on, I'm just, like drinking them. But yeah, but what I want to talk about right now is, like just me in general, like some of like the recent realizations I had. So for starters, I'm kind of sick. I either have a cold or the flu. I don't know which, but my voice is probably like very nasally right now because I'm still kind of like dealing with it. But I haven't really, because sometimes you get sick and get really sick. That hasn't really been the case for me. And for the most part, I have been able to do things, to produce. I have been more tired. I had, like I've had a few days where I could have kind of like, written more, like it's around time for me to go to bed. And I was too tired, so I went and I rested. But, all things considered, like I'm not super sick. And that is kind of that is kind of like the best case scenario. So I'm happy that I didn't, that I didn't get sick like that because it's never great to have the flu or something. Like it's really bad and it gets in the way. And I have a schedule to kind of like to keep up with. So being sick it doesn't really help. And I kind of just. So yes, I'm glad, I'm grateful that I didn't get super sick and that I was actually able to kind of like still get some things done. I will say that I've been kind of like struggling to, write. I'm still writing, I'm making some progress, but things are not flowing as well for me because sometimes I'm writing and it's like the words, they just pop up in my brain and I start writing. And then, these days I have had to kind of like push a little bit more for that. And as a consequence, I know sometimes I'm reading when I'm writing and I'm like, this is not great. Like it is decent. And naturally, I'm gonna, go back to it later on, and I will, I'll go back to it at some point, and I'll kind of like fix it. But like, what if I don't have the inspiration to fix it later on? It just feels like it's everything's very halted. Like I write something and then it's not really flowing, so I move on to the next thing, and so on and so forth. So basically, I'm very I don't know, things are kind of weird in this regard. I don't know kind of like what I can do, but at least I'm getting words out. Like I guess like I'm not making as much progress as I would like because I'm finishing, like this version of the story, and then I'm going to kind of like, so I have like ended this part of my manuscript, and then I'm gonna go back and kind of like fix everything and like connect everything. And with like this being kind of like my level of productivity, I kind of like worry that I won't be able to connect things as well as I want, or as much as I need, to finish the novel. But I will say that I'm kind of like happy that even though like things are not, like regarding like my production, they're not the best, I'm not giving up, and I'm kind of like pushing through it. I'm making progress, and that is all that you can sometimes hope to achieve. Like making little progress is better than making no progress at all. So I'm kind of I don't know, because as I said, sometimes things just flow, sometimes things they just connect, and then there are other times where things they just, like they're not really flowing. Naturally, I have to kind of like be realistic because basically I want to be at 100% all the time, and this is something that I've acknowledged before, but it still is frustrating when you're living it, when you're going through it and you don't really have a solution, because that is kind of like ultimately the thing. It can be very disheartening for you to kind of like get for to make progress, for you to kind of like make things work out. And basically so it can be frustrating and discouraging. Thankfully I don't think I'm discouraged yet. Like I'm still kind of like making progress and like doing everything I need to do to like make sure that I'm kind of like I'm basically doing a little bit every day, and that is like more than when I look back at in the past, like that's more than like I was doing when I was struggling, let's say 5 years ago, when I was working on my second novel. Right now I'm working my third one, and basically I kind of yeah, like I sometimes I would spend like I would go for days and then like without being able to kind of like write anything. And right now, as I said, like I'm making some progress. Maybe it's not as much as I wish I could, but persistence is key. Persistence is very important, and this goes hand in hand with resilience, which brings me to what I wanted to talk about regarding my brain, which is fear. I know I've been talking a lot about fear lately, but it's been very monumental for me to kind of like realize that the reason why everything that is not working well, it's because of fear. It's because and it can be the fear of harm, of something coming to happen to me. It can be the fear of like not corresponding to whatever expectations you and people around you have on you. It can be the fear of as I talked about before, like losing your rights, like losing your standing. And so it can be something physical, but it can also be something emotional. And I think that the emotional ones, like they're the ones that I'm struggling with more lately, because basically I think that this stuff that has to do with me kind of like being physically harmed, is something that I've been able to tackle. I think that was easier to tackle than the emotional things, because like there are things that you can do like at any point in time that they kind of like get in the way of they kind of like they prevent you from being I mean, you can never control all the variables, you can never control everything, which pretty much means that you are going to have moments where you are going to be exposed, and then there could be some type of like situation that is going to kind of like bring harm to you. But like those are so few and far between that I don't know, sometimes it's not even like worthy of like considering them isn't really worth it, because ultimately there's nothing much that you can do, like that is kind of the situation, because basically yeah, like that's not much. Like I mean, there are things you can do to make sure that you're safer, but ultimately, like some of the circumstances, there's not anything that like things are still going to happen. Sometimes you're going to be in the wrong place in the wrong time, and that's going to lead to the situations kind of like happening. And basically there's nothing so, but like basically kind of like, because you have to kind of like accept that this is a part of living. And but I think it's also easier for me to kind of like accept that those things are not really a threat, because like so many things have happened before and so many things have never happened. Of course, not that it's kind of like that's a policy, right? Just kind of like just because like nothing has happened so far, it doesn't mean that nothing will ever happen. But as I said, like that is not really something I'm concerned with when I'm walking down the streets. Maybe I should. Maybe that is not something I should work on. I should be more cautious, because I am cautious with like how I carry myself. But there's generally like not really a threat. I don't really sense a threat when these things happen. So that is kind of and that's on me. That's on me. I know I should probably care more and do more, but that's pretty much where I am at. But the point I'm trying to make is that it's usually the emotional things that kind of like they really haunt me, and that make a huge difference on like the way that I kind of like carry myself. So for example, as I said, like the fear of failure is one that has historically had such like an impact on me. It has made me kind of like do crazy things sometimes. I mean, I say crazy, but like there's so many crazy things out there. We went out yesterday with a friend and her mother to go to new psychiatrist, because she's been struggling with her finding like a doctor that is really helping and can kind of like connect with her. And they have like the craziest stories of what has happened, and like things that happen in their lives. So like when I think about the crazy things about my life, like it's nothing like that, but still it's kind of like it was kind of like those situations, they kind of like a necessary one way or another. Like I didn't have to kind of like open myself up to certain things. I could have just been myself, and yeah. And I don't know, because as I said, like there are so many aspects to kind of like to like you yeah, there's so many aspects to kind of like how the way that something turns out. There's so many variables, and some of them like you can control, but some of them you can't. And I think in my like effort that I've made a lot of the time, it involves kind of like making sure that, you know, like those variables I can control, they became somewhat, you know, like doable. And it is, you know, a very interesting thing for me to be able to look at it and be like, yeah, I can't control some of these things, and I have to stop wanting to control them because I can, and that just leads to me being unwell because, you know, like it's frustrating because I'm trying to control things that cannot really be controlled. So basically, like that is kind of like the reality of my life. You know, at certain points in time where I'm just I'm struggling basically. I'm kind of like trying to find, you know, like my grounding, my ground, and I'm fighting for my ground. You know, I'm fighting, you know, to kind of like have a you know, good standing, but it is, you know, just only so much I can do. And when I was younger, I didn't really see the harm of like trying to kind of like have more influence on the things I can't control. But like right now, I can look at it and I'm like, yeah, if I kind of like create this habit in my head of thinking that I can do something, I can achieve something, I will kind of I will kind of like lose my mind, and I'll blame myself. You know, I'll be like, okay, so this thing didn't happen, and you know, like what could I have done differently? And sometimes the answer is like nothing. You did what you could. It just didn't work out. But a part of my brain is like, if I had done this differently, if I had, you know, achieved this, if I wore this, you know, like all this what ifs, and it is, you know, it is interesting. Like I think it's very telling of who I am as a person. You know, that I struggle so much with relinquishing control, and once again, like it has to do with trauma. But I think that that's always been the case. I was remembering this situation when I was 7, probably. That, you know, I was in this. It was kind of like this event for kids during, you know, like the winter vacation, winter break, and I was kind of like pressured into kind of like, because my mom bought me a brand new bikini for me to go to this event, because there would be kind of like a host at a certain point and we would be kind of like going about, and I was kind of pressured by, you know, this girl who I thought was my friend to kind of like give her my bikini. And this is the type of situation that I've been so embarrassed about like for so long, because it made me feel weak, which is an interesting thing, because what I realized is there's like a lot of situations that have happened, you know, throughout, you know, the years, that once I had that trauma when I was 13, that is basically when some of these things that they started to become kind of like unbearable, you know, for me to consider, because they made me feel weak and one way or another. So there's also like this time where I think I was in second grade, that I went to this another, you know, event, or like a camp that we had, you know, during I don't know if this happened in January, you know, when we were having, you know, it was like vacation time, or it was in the middle of the year, where you know, this for this you know, like this event. But anyway, at any rate, like I did go to this event, and I remember that, you know, like this, you know, girl who I went to school with, who was also at that camp, she said, you know, something, and I ended up crying. I hated that I was such a crybaby, particularly after, you know, that situation, because, you know, it made me feel like I was weak. And you could argue that that is, you know, something like that, but I've always been kind of like a very not a fragile person, but I was very delicate, you know, and this is something I really didn't really like. I think it painted this picture of who I was that really reinforced this notion that, you know, like that I was weak. And the thing is that I don't know, I think right now I can kind of like be more, and I'm more understanding of myself for sure, but also it was, I don't know, like it is an interesting situation to kind of. Okay. But yeah, so like when I look back, I no longer feel kind of like hatred towards myself, because that's what I felt. You know, I look at the situation, you know, when the girl talked me, she talked to me, she said these very harsh words, and I cried, and I hated that I cried at that point in time, but I hated it even more after, you know, like that whole situation. I think it really recontextualized a lot of things, you know, like that trauma. It really made me kind of, so like any situation that, you know, in the past that I thought that made me look weak or feel weak, I really kind of, you know, worked. I don't know, like I started to kind of like hate myself a little bit those situations, and I wasn't fully acknowledging that there was that sort of like self-hatred, and I tried to do better, try to do not necessarily better, but I tried to do things differently, and it was always yeah, like it was never I don't know, like I tried to do things differently, but like the level of success that I achieved was not always great. I think that I still felt like a crybaby all the way through high school, and I hated it, as I said, but I didn't know how to stop myself from crying in certain situations. I was very, I don't know, like, but at the same time, like, I'm thinking right now of positive situations that happened. There's this classmate slash friend of mine when I was in high school, that one day I was kind of like crying and being upset, and she kind of like was very nice to me. She was like, yeah, I also kind of like cry over these things, and I don't know, I think it made me feel better, because I think that she was a person who I was like, okay, she's strong, she has opinions, she voices her opinions, and still she cries. So sometimes, people, they impact your life, like they do things for you that you're not really, I don't know, like people can impact your life in a way that they aren't even like intending. Which kind of like makes me think, like, did I ever impact somebody's life? Like, I don't really care whether or not I did it, because I don't know. I mean, if I did, great, but like that's not really something I'm kind of like inclined. Okay, I picked up my trash can. But like that is, it's nice that it happened. But if it didn't, that was also cool, because that's not really like one of my kind of like goals in life. Like one of my goals in life. I don't really need to kind of yeah, I don't know. I want to be an inspiring person. It's one of those things that I'm like, I don't care. Like if I can kind of like inspire somebody, cool. But if I never really inspire a person in my life, that's also cool. I don't think when I say this, it sounds careless towards other people, but that's not really my intention. Like that is really, something there is something to be said about. I don't know. But yeah, but like that is one of those things that I think that there are like a lot of things that I want to be perceived as, but after so many years of fighting against, I guess, my nature, I finally am at a point where like there are certain things I don't really care about. So for example, being strong, like that is something that, I mean, it is a good aim for you to have, but like my vision of strength for so long was very thwarted, was very warped, and it wasn't healthy or helpful, to me. I had this, person who I wanted to be, and if I was not really aligned with like the way that I envision strength to be, which is kind of like in itself, doozy, because like my version was very stilted, and it was very much inspired by a specific, experience that I had. Not only that one experience, I think like any other trauma that I had after that, it was kind of it impacted the way I kind of like lived my life. And there's nothing wrong with like there's nothing wrong with kind of like wanting to be strong, but I do think that your version of strength should kind of like, you should really put some time and some effort. You should thinking what it was, what it is, and kind of like what are like the limits, because, and also like have to be kind of like kind towards yourself, because you're not going to be able to be strong like every single day of your life. There are going to be moments of weakness, and that is totally fine. You don't need to get caught up in what, like in every single little situation that happen. You can let things go. I think that the healthiest thing you can do is letting things go. And once again, like that, there are like so many different ways that you can kind of, like be that person. There are so many different ways that you can achieve that, and you have to find like what is more realistic, to you. Which is why, pretty much what I mean when I said I don't care about being strong anymore, is that I don't care about like that version of strength that I had, that version that was pretty oppressive towards me and towards other people. It involved me kind of like crushing things and people and all that, and I don't want that anymore, because I think that I have the ability to do better, and also because I understand that, like the reason why there was so much about, the presentation of the way, like when I say that, like I was strong and all that, like there was a lot of it that was just the presentation, like it was very much, um, yeah, that it was just about how I was perceived, because I couldn't really validate myself, which is in itself something that I have had, struggle with for years. Because that's pretty much it. Like, why is that I feel the urge to kind of like present myself a certain way? It is all because I mean, I'm doing better regarding that, but for so long I couldn't really validate myself. As I said, I really had to uh, get that validation from external parties, from like other people. And I'm finally at a point where because I think ultimately what I want for me, what I want for myself, is to kind of like not care. I don't want to have like these kind of like, it doesn't have to be a kind of like I don't give a fuck type of, I don't care. It can be much more muted, but I kind of like want to, yeah, like as I said, like I want to not care about the way I'm perceived, about the way I am. I just want to be, myself. And naturally, like I'm kind of like figuring out like what that means, because I don't know, like we are all so complex. Human beings, any person, even somebody you consider to be shallow, there is a level of complexity there that is fascinating to explore, and which I kind of I'm trying to look at people like this, instead of like looking at them as this single-minded individuals who kind of like just think, a certain way. They kind of like don't. I don't know. I think that when you try to look at people like that, as them having layers, it kind of like helps you maybe not understand what they're coming from, but at least, yeah, like maybe you don't understand, but you still, um, I don't know how do I put it, like you don't understand them because whatever they're doing is still harmful, but it kind of like it adds, something to like that person. You try to be like, okay, you understand that they're wrong, the way they're going about things is not particularly practical, but you're kind of like, I don't know, I'm struggling to, I think maybe it is, me being sick. I'm struggling to kind of like keep track of things, to kind of like, to concentrate. And I'm kind of like losing my train of thought time and time again. But what I'm trying to say is that when you kind of like understand certain aspects of people, they don't seem so evil. For example, they don't seem, because it's not like I'm thinking people are evil necessarily, but because a lot of people, they're just like they just have like the wrong idea. And I'm kind of like at this point I was talking about fear, that I'm kind of like facing like some fears. I'm facing kind of some realities, and I like it's kind of been thinking about worst case scenarios basically. And it is interesting because when you see it with like those scenarios, you're kind of disarming them a little bit. So like that things happening the way that they do, it doesn't seem so bad. Right now I have because it is an interesting thing, because I was basically thinking about a prophecy. Sounds so crazy to talk about prophecies at this time and in this age, but it was about like this woman who kind of like said prophecy. And it's not like I believe that like her words, that there's a prophecy there, but people have I don't know, people have there's they have their own volition. So I don't think that necessarily, if like what she prophesized is going to, come true. I don't necessarily think that, it would be the prophecy. I just think that it's people voting. But it does kind of like annoy me that, if a certain scenario comes to fruition, people are going to be like, it was the prophecy. I don't like that. I think that living your life based on prophecies is quite dangerous. But like there's no guarantee that like the worst case scenario is going to come. So I'm basically just vibing. I'm kind of like out here, and there's nothing. I don't know. It's just also kind of like frustrating because whenever you see that, because I'm not just talking about this kind of like empty situations. There's like a lot of people who I know who kind of like buy into that crap. and it's frustrating, because you wish people would be more reasonable in their choices and be more open-minded to understand that maybe they're wrong, but that is not it's not what happens. Like there are some situations from somewhat recently. I'm thinking about like last year. I mean, we are already in April, so it's been some months. But like people, like they kind of like think a certain way, and as I said, it's frustrating to see that they kind of like are leaning towards a direction based on a lot of like different fallacies, different beliefs, and it kind of like just raised the question, like, would I, if I had the power to do something about it, what would I do? Like, would I do it? Probably, but like it depends on the power, too. It depends on what is kind of happening. And I don't really have I don't know, I'm just frustrated, but at the same time, like, I'm kind of like dealing better with things, and by things I mean specifically with like the worst case scenarios. I can kind of like contemplate them happening in a way that doesn't lead to despair, for my part. So that is growth, and that is kind of like, that's quite something, like that is what I want. It's kind of like what I wanted all along, is for the situations to kind of like not affect me, and so for me to kind of like work on my things. And I'm kind of struggling because, as I said, I'm having some difficulty working on my novel, and without that work, I'm kind of, like, what exactly am I supposed to do? Because when I think about, whenever, the thoughts of ending it all, which have not really been very frequent, I had like one thought this week, and then everything else was and everything else was and I haven't really had one for many weeks, so it's been pretty good. But like, whenever I'm thinking about it, like, the thing that's kind of like getting me, like, they're preventing me from, I guess, like, I don't know, it's kind of like my novel. Like, that is one of those things that, like, I'm not going to do anything right now because I want to finish it, but I'm struggling working on it. So I'm kind of like at there's this paradox, basically, you could say, and I'm struggling. Like, that's basically it. I'm struggling to find meaning. I have other anchors, like, I definitely do, but I want this anchor to be what is kind of like grounding me. I want, yeah, I want it. Honestly, it's more than a want. It's almost like a need. Like, I really need to kind of like work on myself and on the things that like make sense to me. And sometimes, like, I don't know, I feel like some of my anchors are usually I don't know, they were, I mean, some a lot of the things that I kind of like, I've been saving money, so a lot of the things that I usually do throughout the month to give me a little pleasure here and there, like, I've kind of like put them in the back burner, and I'm not really doing anything with them, but I'm kind of, I feel like I'm all over the place. I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. I feel like, a part of me is very much, I feel like, as I said, I feel like I am struggling. Oh, hold on. I feel like I don't know what I'm doing, and right now, so far so good. So far, I'm kind of like still grounded in reality, but it does feel like at a certain point, whatever I have grounding me right now is not going to be enough. And then what do I do? Like, how do I prevent those thoughts from taking over my mind and doing something, that is going to be very permanent? And I don't know, man. I'm kind of struggling, and my head, I try to kind of like, like, not, I'm trying not to despair, but it's kind of hard. And I think this, all this talking I've been doing, instead of like reassuring me, it's kind of like just pointing out how empty everything is. I don't think I have an empty life. I don't think that, yeah, I don't think that like that at all. I think I have so many things. I have, school now that I'm invested in. I have work. I'm going to maybe start working on, something. Yeah, like, I might start working on something that has some type of meaning to me, something regarding like this new area that I'm exploring, and that is something, I have, like my life is, I mean, that's the thing, like there is meaning at every corner, but it doesn't feel like it feels like when I get there, it's not really meshing with me. I'm kind of just, like moving about life in a very inconsequential way. And I need consequence, I need connection between things. And I don't know if like that is where I am at, I feel like, I'm struggling. It doesn't help that I am sick. Like that is definitely, something that is getting in the way. But even if I don't know, I kind of, completely out of nowhere, I thought that would occur to me. But yeah, but like I kind of, like I don't know how to fix things. I'm kind of like struggling with finding myself, with finding, like what I'm all about, and I don't know if I have an answer, and that's the thing. Like, do I need an answer, or do I just need prompts? Like just like as if I'm an AI, I just need to kind of like consider certain things. And as I said, okay, let me just move on because this is not helping. Sometimes talking, putting your thoughts out there, like, is very helpful. You can kind of like, get yourself going, and get some words out. But, right now it is not being helpful. It is getting me to be more aggravated. So let's talk back to fear. So fear is kind of the number one thing that I've been mentioning lately, and it's also kind of like true. I find that like if every single thing I'm trying to kind of like do without is somehow connected with fear. So for example, my fantasies, which have been which they kind of like have been at the like I've been at a healthy point where it is not they're not really taken away. They're not just occupying the entirety of my brain, and I think that like they exist because of fear. As I said before, fear of failure, fear of like being consequential. Because a part of me is kind of like just wants to be kind of like this anonymous force, kind of like in the kind of like in the corner, not really just I want to be left to my own devices basically. But then there's a different part of me that really wants, I guess, an audience in a certain way. Like I really want. To be seen, to be perceived, to be heard, and that's the thing. Like you can be seen, perceived, and heard, like in your regular life without having an audience. But it is like my brain, is wired to kind of like to that specifically. One thing, because I feel like that I was talking about like validating myself. So I think that when I can't validate myself, I kind of want. I want kind of like that's pretty much where an audience comes. I want that type of validation. So, for example, if I'm struggling with not caring, like it's like, I need other people to kind of like look at me as somebody who doesn't care. Because that's the way that I will be able to kind of like achieve that. I know that this is bullshit, but my brain can't tell apart. Basically, my brain is kind of like out here just kind of like wanting, craving this, and that's pretty much where the fantasies they come out, and they have to do with anything and everything. And I finally at a point where it does seem like I am doing better, in terms of just kind of like being able to kind of like ascertain myself. When I say ascertain myself, not necessarily with other people, with myself, and that is a beautiful thing. Whenever I can see that I can kind of I don't need to be validated. I can kind of like just exist the way I am, and that is enough. I don't. But honestly, I'm gonna wrap this up right now because I'm getting a little dizzy, and that is not good. I haven't really been dizzy so far. I think I need to lay down. So, anyways, bye.